Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vertical Reach podcast. This is where storytelling meets strategy. I'm Pauline Gray, and each week I sit down with the creators, innovators, and voices shaping the world of vertical storytelling. Let's tell stories that connect. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the current episode of the Vertical Reach podcast. Today we have Thom Woodley in the chair, who's amazing, a real trailblazer in the microdrama vertical space. The vertical reach as a theory, as a concept, is that moment when you extend upward, physically or professionally, normally used in athletics to describe how high, for example, a basketball player can jump, which of course occurs after years and years of training. But in our context, the vertical reach is really about what exists above you, what you want to achieve or attain, when staying at the same level is no longer enough, and using the methods that we use to achieve that level of current achievement just no longer fit the current business model or mold of the economy. Vertical reach in our context is about the act of rising to meet what's higher with your body, your work, or your ambitions. This podcast is about people who didn't just pivot careers, they changed altitude altogether. This season focused on filmmakers and creators entering the vertical microdrama space. Really is part I've been finding as a part of a large integration or personal reinvention. My goal is to document real-time transitions, not to really deliver some polished hindsight or how to do this particular thing in a particular way. And today in the guest story, I have Thom Woodley. And of course, Thom, jump in here at any moment to kind of tweak or expand my description of your bio and your background.
Yeah.
Thom is a New York-based creator, writer, and really a pioneer in digital entertainment. He's one of the first people to really do the whole sort of scripted online sitcom in 2006 with the Berg, which is amazing,
Which is dating me that you just dropped a year. That's literally 20 years ago, but that's okay. I put it in there.
He also made and sold web series to IFC, Michael Eisner, Mark Cuban, as well as numerous spec pilots and micro-budget features. And of course, he's well awarded in advertising, copywriting, and creative director space. I'm sure we all know the iconic ads for Dos Equis, the most interesting man in the world campaign. Thom shepherded that. He was the executive creative director of CollegeHumor, Dropout, where he also ran branded content. He started in vertical in the early 2010s, designing the story system and writing hundreds of episodes for the seminal Episode interactive app, as well as writing for mobile games like James Bond's A World of Espionage. He was head of content for early vertical series app Rizzle. He was the first writer and creator signed to the WGA under its new media Caucus and helped found the IAWTV Streaming Awards. And just saying, spoke to Congress with the WGA about net neutrality.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, though, it didn't work. Eventually, we lost that fight, but we tried,
Okay. Well, we can tap on that and sort of how now in 2026, we may revisit that as the industry and the space has really expanded and become a bigger player in the entertainment industry space. He deeply dove into microdramas in 2023. He's written for many different apps and independent producers. He's worked with Flare Flow, Vertical, Ulta, Any Short, and Viglu. And currently, he has a consultancy called Hudson Vertical, working with apps to create, write, and produce shows with brands who want to partner with apps to make branded content, and with clients looking to get into the space, potential investors, founders, streamers, YouTube slabs, etc., exploring how to do microdrama. So let's take a moment perhaps, and Thom, why don't you kind of expand a bit on Hudson Vertical and kind of where you are with that, and sort of the blending of the traditional advertising experience you have with things like the Dos Equis work, and now moving in with brands as well. And then we'll shift into my more sort of standard questions for my guests. How does that sound?
Great. Yeah. I mean, as you said, it's kind of a pretty varied bio. I've had a couple careers in my adult life here, and but I always came at this from a storytelling perspective. That's what I was first. I was a playwright. I actually got into this hoping to write musicals back in the day, and so that's where I started from. this world of playwriting, screenwriting, storytelling. And falling into advertising was an accident. I quite literally had a temp job at an ad agency the same year that I created the Berg, and they had just sold the idea for Dos Equis' Most Interesting Man in the World, and now they needed an in-house writer who had comedy experience and who was also very cheap, and entered me into that. But so advertising is one of those things that I had no desire to get into, but I found I was pretty good at and paid very well. And sometimes in life, in the creative fields, in the arts, whatever, you just have to take those little turns when they come to you. So I did that. I did that at the agency level for quite some time, but I always was itchy to get back into full-time content creation, full-time writing, and producing especially. And I guess if there's one thing I've sort of specialized in my weird career, it's been early entry into new media, right? And so whether that is the web series space, literally pretty much the year that YouTube launched, or like you mentioned, Episode Interactive, there were very few, if any, kind of like choose your own adventure mobile games there, and working through that. Or I had some early experiments in the scripted podcast space, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, verticals just kind of fit in there. I can talk about the vertical world for hours. I won't. You asked about Hudson Vertical specifically. Yeah, I had segued from sort of producing to writing verticals, a little bit of both. And a guy I know last year, Andrew Beck, who has been independent producer, film feature producer, worked for many, many years with the Weinstein Company, Spyglass, etc., had reached out to me, and we ended up partnering up and formed this consultancy because we were just realizing there is so much opportunity in this space. And for me, it's like I don't know if I suffer from this or I am blessed by this, and probably most days it's a little bit of both, but I have just a million things going on at any one time, a million things I could be doing, and brilliant ideas. They're mostly not all brilliant, but in the moment they might seem brilliant, of things I could be doing. But in the vertical space, this last year, it really has seemed, wow, no, this is actually one of those times where the more you try to do, the better it's going to turn out, right? And the more plates you keep spinning and balls in the air, they will feed off of each other. And that's really been true. And so, what we set ourselves up to do is consult for anyone at any end of this business who wanted to get in. And sort of right away, I got kind of sucked up into working directly with the apps, like Flare Flow, like we mentioned, and, creating shows and IP for them, but also at the same time, consulting for people who are not on the app side, right? And so what that means specifically is that as clients, have clients who are sort of legacy streamers, right? Maybe not the biggest streamers that, the top 5 that you're thinking of, but some other streamers who are looking at how to get into the space, clients who are brands and prospective clients who are brands, trying to figure out how to bridge that branded content and advertising experience. I should also say the time I was an executive at CollegeHumor, I primarily focused on running the branded content and advertising divisions there, which is what kept CollegeHumor alive and afloat before it transitioned to Dropout, its subscription service, which was the best move that it could ever have made. And Sam and the team have been doing brilliant things over there since then. But so I have that deep advertising and story experience. And I looked around this space and I realized, hey, I might be one of like 5 or 6 people in the US who have anything close to like this combination of experience, right? I've made things myself on this micro budget level. I think the first vertical I did, it was like a 100-minute show for $50,000, something like that,
A small car.
Yeah, literally, it's my rent here in New York City for a shockingly small number of months. No, but I've written a ton. I have literally done verticals before, which very few people in the US had done. And I have the advertising background and the branded content background. So and the other thing that Hudson Vertical was kind of formed to do is, pull together investors. And so that's kind of the big exciting thing that's happening now is, figuring out how people are going to invest in this space. And I can talk a lot about that without going into specifics, but because that's a kind of an exciting thing on the horizon for us. But that's Hudson and Vertical.
Amazing, amazing. So I really want to hear more about the investing side and just opportunities in that area. But if we circle back on that, I was going to ask you a couple sort of my sort of standard
Yeah, of course.
question. Okay. So I'm curious for you, was there a seminal moment when you realized that your horizontal growth in the advertising space had kind of capped out as it stood, and you decided that you're going to reach higher differently? Or is it more maybe of like an evolution where you kind of osmosis kind of observe the market, or did you have a bing bing light bulb or something?
Well, first of all, I have to say, I love this conceit that you have here with this. And I love the concept of the vertical reach. And I hadn't fully put it together, but I think that's brilliant. I think the way you're talking about this is really brilliant. So kudos on that. It's very funny because for me, I think it was an evolution in some respects. Like I never had both feet in advertising emotionally, right?
Mhm.
And I got a lot of flack from that from like my fellow advertising people because to me advertising was a job, right? And it was a job that could be exciting at times and I could get to go to set and go on some fun shoots and so forth, but it wasn't like but I was a filmmaker, man. Like so, like I separated the art and the craft of it and I was successful at advertising, but I was not as successful as I think you could be. And to really, really be like one of the top people in advertising, I think you have to fully drink your own, you have to brew and then drink your own Kool-Aid, right? You have to fully buy
Exactly.
into the concept that like advertising really creates culture. And look, in some ways it does. Like I've worked on campaigns, like for instance, The Most Interesting Man, that, yeah, that added a lot to culture. Maybe 1 in 100 campaigns like does something like that. Maybe it does. It's not the driver of culture that it was like in the 60s through the early 2000s for sure. But so it was an evolution in that it was more like I am going to give myself permission to leave this day job life
Mm.
and go into a different day job life. And that's going to come with considerable risk. And it did. But actually, one of the reasons I love your vertical reach concept here is 2 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago now, I got laid off. And I've been laid off a few times in my life, usually, a couple times at an agency, like when they consolidate business and they lose clients and it just happens, right? They have to downsize. But I took after Rizzle was this vertical app that I was the head of content for, and it had a lot of flaws. It wasn't ready really for the market, but I had a blast, making shows on there and working on it and really liked it. And then after they decided they were going to reconstitute and they were going to focus in India and they weren't going to have like an American operation anymore. And my wife and I were given the opportunity to move to India, but we opted out of that. And so instead I took a job being a creative director in-house at a brand thinking, okay, I'm in my 40s. This is like the right move. We're going to have a kid. So, okay, fine.
College, your
What's that?
W-2, 401k.
Exactly. Back to that world where it's like, yeah, I know where the insurance is coming from, like literally a 9 to 5. The difference is in advertising at an agency, you're working 60 to 80 hour weeks regularly, On the brand side, it's like 40 hour week tops. So I'm like, great, fine. But it was not interesting to me in any way, if I'm being honest. There was no room for growth, no room at this particular company for redefinition. And I'm someone who likes to build. I like to dream. That's a cliche, but I like to dream. I like to build. I like to be part of that. And the energy wasn't right. And ultimately, they laid me off, and probably because my enthusiasm I mean, I had to lay a bunch of people off, but my enthusiasm, I probably found myself on the list because I wasn't a fit. Like my enthusiasm for this corner of the corporate world was not correct, right? And I don't mind admitting that now, although there's always this weird thing about being downsized, right? About how you hate to admit it, especially like on LinkedIn, where it's a constant like posture positioning thing. But at the time, my first thought was, okay, I need to go in, and this is sort of when AI was really starting to hit, right? This is 2023. And I was like, I have to go in now and learn new skills. And I almost released a podcast. I ultimately didn't, but I very similar thing, which I was called Upsize, right? The Upsize podcast, where it's like for people who have been downsized but have upsized themselves in the process. They have learned new skills, they have redefined themselves, which is very similar to what you're talking about here. So I think that's the moment, and that basically marks the moment where I, shortly after that, got back into verticals and started producing them here. I mean, it's a rough couple years of like not having like stability in that sense. And now I'm working a ton, and there's stability in this and a lot of work. There was a little bit of time where it's like, oh, this is very, very risky. So it wasn't that you don't mean horizontal in terms of the aspect ratio. You just mean in terms of the
Growth.
Yeah, the growth. Yeah. And that was about it. It's like that was a very definite time when I was like, okay, you know what? I've officially aged out of the advertising world where it's like if you are not running the shop by age 40, then increasingly you don't have anywhere to go. Right. And there's options, but gosh, I will say that like it's like a solid half of my network of advertising people is like they are unemployed or underemployed, if not more so. So yeah, that moment for sure, I was like, this cannot be all there is. Like working is important, but ultimately getting back and telling stories, even if by the way, these are stories that would not be my first choice to tell, right? Like billionaire and werewolf stories are not my jam necessarily creatively, but just the act of actively writing for a screen, is and dreaming about what could be in this new media, that is I that is 1,000 times more interesting, and I have the energy for it in a way that I never had the energy for, something that was completely just, Sometimes we make choices in life that are like on paper, oh, this is the right choice, right? Like this is the
Great
thing that
choice,
I
very
need
great
to
choice.
do. Yes, exactly. And then deep down we know, no, this is not the right choice, but I have to do it anyway, So that's what
Maybe
that felt
screaming
like.
in the background.
Yeah.
I totally understand that. It's funny you mention the energy thing because on my side, also, as we discussed in the past, I also have an advertising,
Right.
marketing, on set production background. And like your colleagues, I also experienced sort of a step down in the quantity of work coming in, especially here in Los Angeles. It's been a
Yeah.
very drastic reduction. And as far as the part about being laid off or being downsized, I lived in England for several years, and the term for being laid off in England is called being made redundant.
Yes. Yes.
As the Brits are very literal often, I always thought, what an interestingly accurate term.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always liked that.
Redundancy means there are too many of you, or you're repeating yourself,
Yeah.
repeating
Yeah.
you.
You have no unique value that the other is not represented with someone else. Yeah.
You're merely a duplicate, essentially. And so, perhaps similar to you, on the energy side, I found myself asking myself, or will I have the energy to execute in this next chapter?
Yeah.
And as I started asking myself those questions on a spiritual level, the vertical world sort of unfolded in front of me.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I felt energy again.
Great.
I felt a desire to explore and investigate and learn, and that sort of invigoration I had when I was a PA, running around trying to sort out the walkies or just timing shots. And,
Yeah.
all of a sudden I realized, so I listened to another podcast the other day, and it talked about what burnout is. And burnout essentially is not working too hard and too much. It's ultimately a misalignment between your
Hmm.
spirit and what you're working too hard on. And I was like, yeah, I was so misaligned in certain ways. So I was burning out. I don't know if how much that resonates with your experience, but
As you're saying that, I have a similar definition that I constantly revisit upon myself because I am the type of person who get really emotionally invested if I let myself. And sometimes I have to dive, like when I'm working on something creative, I have to, and it maybe this is the truth for all or most artists, like I have to actively like divest myself from some of the emotional attachment to things and outcomes, right? Especially outcomes. It's like the stoic philosophy is like I can control the work, I can control the effort I put into it, I can control the time I put into it to a certain degree. I cannot control the outcome, and that's fine. But I suffered for a long time, and of course still do, with disappointment over failures and things not working. And then one day I just sort of like dissected that word, disappointment. Okay. So it's like I had an appointment in my mind, right? Of something that I was supposed to get to and something that didn't happen. And that's it. It's just a meeting that didn't happen. It doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Or maybe it's not meant to happen, and that's fine. But it's like once I reframed that as like, oh, it's an appointment. It's just like a moment in time that I missed. Well, there's plenty of more moments in time. So I don't know. Like that's one of those things that I think like the more you dissect why those things feel bad when they happen from an objective point of view, then I think the easier it is to grow.
Absolutely. I'm a Buddhist, and when I learned one of the things I've learned in Buddhism is that the number one leading cause of disappointment is expectation. Now I really focus, and I struggle deeply to really focus on wanting the best possible outcome for whatever it is, and not attaching what I think it should be or look like exactly for my personal life manual that I've written in detail, and kind of just releasing, like you said, sort of Socratic or Platonic method of the attachment part, you know, and that's what it's a constant daily battle, I'm constant, but
Sure.
I'm getting better. And I'm curious though, more sort of circling back to sort of the work day-to-day aspect of it. What do you find carried over from your previous work in advertising to your current work at the consultancy and in the vertical space? Are there certain parallels, certain similarities, certain client interaction protocols, or
Yeah, I mean, I think advertising, well, look, in some ways, going through the advertising world prepares you for lots of different, for pretty much any career. Like, I feel like advertising is one of those careers that you can go into it knowing nothing, like be dropped into the fire, and you will be very stupid for a while in your job, but then eventually, you'll pick up. And one of the things that I think you really, I should say two things that I think you really learn in advertising that I don't know where else you would learn them is the ability to pitch to clients, right? So the ability to, whether that is pitching yourself or pitching a product or even thinking of yourself as a product, right? It's something I've always sort of struggled with because I don't do a lot of social media about myself. I never have. I always sort of like obliquely want to. And I think the people who really succeed at that are people who just, they give zero Fs
you can
about, you know what I mean? Like they do not care about thinking about themselves as a product, and they're able to make that distinction and separation, and really, and I've always had that thing. It's like, oh, I can pitch this product like nothing, like that's fine. Pitching myself as a person, like a little harder, but so that's one thing, like being able to have comfort in front of clients, understand, and by clients, I really just mean anyone who is making a decision about the thing that you were trying to make, the creative work that you were trying to make, and really putting yourself in the perspective of not what I want to do, but like what do they need? What does the people who are paying for this need out of this situation? I think that's something that you learn. You cannot survive in advertising unless you learn that. And then, the other piece I think is just thinking about things in a short, just in terms of the content sense, right? Like in a short, compact way. And I used to kind of half make fun of advertising or explain why I thought it was easy by saying it's just the shortest, stupidest road between 2 points. Like you have the product and the person who needs to buy the product. And it's like, it really is, like what is the simplest way to get them to buy it? And there's been times when like I would get a brief from a strategist. My discipline in advertising was, primarily as a copywriter, right? I mean, I did the creative director path, but I started out, from the copy perspective. And no, there's been a number of times where it's like, the brief will say something like, get people to understand that Pringles is the cracker of fun. And then like my tagline would be like, I'd try all of these like brilliant, clever things. And then on the last slide, I'd have like, all right, here's another direction we can go. Pringles, it's the cracker of fun. And they'd be like, brilliant. How did, it's like,
light
how did I
bulb.
do it? Control C, Control V. Are we really? Yeah. So those kind of things, just like understanding like, and then I think that's helped with vertical definitively for many reasons. I mean, obviously it's a format in which you have a minute per episode, right? But also you have 3 seconds to stop the initial scroll, and just thinking about like that, like what's going to do that. And you have the essentially what boils down to a CTA at the end of every episode. Like, how are you going to get people to buy the next thing? I mean, I think that people coming from advertising have probably almost in some ways have better training for writing verticals than people coming from like traditional Hollywood in a way. And then there's also just the fact that the verticals industry is so dependent on advertising. Like literally the episodes that we are writing are ads. They are used as ads. And so, yeah, that's kind of I think both of those things are my understanding of it, and my lack of frustration with what I might otherwise find frustrating about verticals is probably because of the advertising experience.
Love it, love it. So now as you made this shift, what felt risky and which felt inevitable? What kept you up at night and what was like, this is happening and the train has left the station and
I mean, if you're talking about the shift from like, yeah, like that I did a couple years ago from what ultimately was not that long of a contract, but like the idea of having like a full-time job in a brand. And by the way, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do that again. I think if there was like an entertainment company, like a streamer or something like that, that my skills were right for, then I would absolutely take an executive role again. But the shift into getting back like full time into away from advertising in general and branding and marketing and towards something that had more content creation and storytelling at its core. The immediate concern was like the mundane pedestrian stuff, right? I live in New York City. I have 3 children. In a couple, I don't know when you're posting this, but in a couple of weeks it will be 4, so
wow.
yeah. So I have one in college, like one going to her first year of college in film school, and one in high school, and then a 3-year-old, and then one in utero. So there's a lot going
Wow.
on. And I live in Manhattan. And, my wife is also in the entertainment business, which means like that's not the way it's supposed to work, right? Like the way it's supposed to work is that one person is in the entertainment business and the other person has like a real job.
Table.
Yeah, they're like a doctor or a lawyer or in finance or something like that. My wife's a producer on the feature side, which it's also really tough right now. And so just that aspect of how can I justify, leaving a job? And in this case, they did the pushing for me by downsizing me, which was great. But in retrospect, I was really mad at first about that. It's like, how dare you reject me and my abilities or not see what I can do? But ultimately, I think it's been the best thing for my career and my life. And I'm making more money at this now than I was at that job. So ultimately, it's a risk because life, especially again, Manhattan, but LA is the same. Like life is very expensive right now, only getting more expensive. And especially as like, it's one thing to do something like this in your 20s, but as like I'm in my 40s and it's like, okay, ultimately, like these are supposed to be the years when like we are at the height of our like, adult. Yeah.
Speaking.
Yeah. We're peaking. We're at like our crest. Like we still have most of our brains left. But we're supposed to also have like, an infallible bank account right now, which I'm like a couple years of underwork and that went away. Right. And so all of those things is just sort of like, what is this dumb? Like, should I do a complete career shift? Like something that has nothing to do with creativity. Right. And I explored some things and I was just like, I actually don't know what that could be. I think I felt differently in my 20s when it's like, oh, I could do anything. I could do anything in the world. Like there's still time. But once you get into your 40s, I think especially, it's like, hey, there's not time. Like I could go be a therapist or something like that, but I have to go to school. Like by the time I finish everything that would, all the training to do something that I'm actually interested in and would make money, it's like, I'd be like 50, and like, and it's not
Graduated
too
with my
late, but
title.
what's that? Yes. Yeah, for sure. Seriously. And anyway, so that kept me up at night and just the general uncertainty of our industry still keeps me up. Like where all the stuff is going, like I embraced it because I had to, but it's all so much of a giant question mark. It's like, are verticals going to be around a year from now, 6 months from now? I don't know. Yeah, I think so. I've put a lot of energy into solving that question. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm going to do if they don't, if they disappear, if they flame out. I gave a presentation a couple months ago to a room full of like brand managers and ad buyers and CMOs and things like that. And I was one speaker among many, and I was the only one speaking about verticals there. And they all watched like really intently. And then there was a Q&A session. And the first question asked was, okay, but isn't this just a trend? Isn't this just going to go away? You know? And I had to sit and think about that. And I said, to be fair, I don't know, right? It's very possible. However, I can also remember people asking me or telling me that same thing 20 years ago about YouTube, that, oh
Or
yeah,
the
this is
internet in general, just internet. The internet, this thing
yeah,
that's gonna
yes.
we need the
Internet in
internet.
general. Yeah.
Yeah. I got dial up and good,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Or I remember like when I was a kid and like playing video games and like friends of mine who were like really into video games and their parents being like, that's never going to be a job. What are you doing? Yeah. And now with the AI shift and everything like that, it's a whole new level of expansion, but also existential quandary about it. So Yeah.
So let me ask you two more questions, and I'll let you continue striving and vertically and reaching up. What do you see? I know you mentioned the consultancy. What is your next swipe up?
So I should say, like, I'm really enjoying creating shows for apps right now. And I should say, I think I am a hesitant futurist. Like, I'm not a pessimist about technology and about AI in the same way that I think a lot of people are. And I should caveat that and say, like, I got into entertainment like for the people of it and for the humanity of it, right? Like I said, the theater, like that's what I wanted to do and write for dialogue delivered by humans and for an audience that was sitting in a darkened space for 2 hours, whether that was a play or a movie, right? Like that's what I
The
wanted to do.
trailers are, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coming to in a world, in a land. Yeah.
I think being a purist about these things only gets you so far. Like I remember, like I love David Lynch, the director David Lynch, and at one point he had said something about like where he like cursed out the idea of watching a movie on your phone, and of course, like yeah, like all right, this is a guy in his 70s, and by the way, who's had a completely blessed life in terms of like a filmmaker, and from artist to filmmaker with obviously bumps in the road, but that was a man who could do anything he wanted in the space, right? So it's like, all right, on one hand, yes, anything you say, David, like I'm gonna listen to it. And like on the other hand, it's like most of us don't get that luxury, right? Most of us don't get the carte blanche to do. And I think sometimes the people who like the Yorgos Lanthimos of the world and like or like the Christopher Nolans or the people making Game of Thrones who are like, oh, your TV should be like this kind of TV to watch our show. It's like, yeah, but come on, dude. Like again, the more the more precious we are about these things, ultimately, like that doesn't help most of us. And for me, it was just like, what do I want more? Do I want to like stick to my guns and be a cinephile purist and never do anything again, or do I want to keep working and make things? And I have this argument with my daughter frequently because she is a freshman film major cinephile purist at Emerson. And so she's like, I hate AI. And I know a lot of actually people of her generation do, and they are actually anti-social media. And by the way, like I'm all for that. I like seeing this concept of like bringing back like very, very inexpensively made indie films shot on the phone that are just like human stories. Like I welcome that. I would love to make some of those. But anyway, to get back around to your question, I think verticals is the first format that AI will completely take over.
Mm.
And I think that there's reasons for this. So talking to apps at a lot of them, and Flareflow was one that made the switch to AI first, right? Or at least got headlines and a fair amount of flack for saying they were going to make the switch to AI first. Now, in reality, they're still doing live production and AI. But what I'm learning talking to a number of different apps is that the AI stuff is working. And this was a big question mark I had. And I know it was working in China. I know in China, people were watching AI produced shows at a great scale, and they were also paying for them, right? Although keep in mind in China, the verticals market is different. A lot more of it is ad supported than it is here. But my priors at first were like, I don't know how much people are going to watch AI shows. And then my prior was like, well, okay, maybe they'll watch them, but I really, really don't think like Americans are going to pay for them, right? Well, lo and behold, I no longer think that anymore. In the last month, I've really seen a sea change in terms of the quality, like the visual quality of these things. And it's getting to the point where someone who has spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours working through and thinking through AI, have a difficult time sometimes figuring out if a shot is AI, right? Like it's to that point, right? But also, not even that, I think there's a sizable audience who can't tell either way. And there's a sizable audience who does not care. They do not care if it's AI.
Who has the biggest size? Don't care.
I think so. I think we hear a lot about like the backlash about people who really care because that's from a perspective of like we're in the entertainment industry and like, yeah, I don't want gaffers and makeup artists to lose their job, right? No, of course not. So those people care, right? But your average like Nancy in Nebraska who's sitting and watching these things, no, as long as the people are beautiful and it has the same. And the thing is with AI, the people can be more beautiful. And by the way, if Nancy,
you'd like them to be. Actually.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I've had a couple shows that it's like we wrote the script, internally tested well, and then hand it over to a director, and for some reason, whether it is something goes weird in production, the budget's too low, they cast actors who are like, they're fine, or they just don't click with the audience or whatever, and the script and the show just doesn't perform well. So from a business perspective, I was like, hey, if AI performs even a quarter as good as the live production stuff does, they're all going to make that switch. I was
And the
wrong.
speed of response to adjusting the change, you can quote unquote reshoot
That's right.
an AI project to match I imagine to match the metrics and the feedback in
Absolutely.
real time.
Well, we don't like that Thom played the boss. Okay, Pauline's going to play the boss now. That's it.
Yeah.
Like they just switch it out.
We
Like
don't like
that's,
that ending.
yeah.
And I also can imagine sort of the multiple sort of choose your own adventure, and I'm dating myself now, by using that term, but
No, but
multiple
that's where it's going to go. I think that's one capacity where it could go. We're not there yet. It can't be immediate. But I do think that like, look, I think the model that a lot of apps are exploring, like wisely so, is, wait a minute, why do we need to produce 60 episodes all at once? Well, when you're doing a live production, you do, right? Because it's like, we have these actors for a week. We need to amortize production.
location. We're shooting all the kitchen shots.
Exactly. Well, now it's like we can produce 10.
And on live production, you're saying, okay, we're shooting out the kitchen today.
Mm,
Then we're going to go shoot the bedroom, and then we're going to redress the kitchen, shooting the bedroom as the dining room.
that's right.
You're going to keep moving. We're going to shoot 10 locations in this one location next 6 days. And that's a machine. And that's how we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and in the AI world, like a lot more apps are suddenly saying, wait a minute, let's do 10 episodes and test it. Or let's do 20 episodes and see if it's going to be a success. Because we know that like 1 out of every 20 shows might be a hit, right? So for the same amount of money, like we can make, so it just makes sense, And I think the combination of who this audience is, like they're not looking for the most nuanced storytelling to begin with, let's be honest, right? And they're mostly watching on a phone, which is like, if you're going to pick a screen where like AI is not going to bother you, that's the one, right? Like blown up on a cinema screen, different story, but like, right? I just think it makes sense.
4K, 8K, 1K, 2K, who cares? It's right here.
Right. And then the other thing is, if these shows are 1/4 as successful as like a live production, then this is going this way. I was wrong. They are as, if not more, successful. And that is in terms of making money. These shows are now making money at a higher rate than the originals, than the live production, for all the reasons above.
Amazing.
And they cost a tenth of the cost. And again, I think what some apps are doing really smartly is they are taking the shows and structures that have proven to work, like going through the list of like the top 100 verticals of all time, and taking that structure and saying, what if this was in space? Or what if this was in medieval? What if we put this thing onto it? And coming up with something they couldn't have shot before for live production, but that is really, really visual and something that people have not seen on their phones before done that way. So I think it's actually AI. I'm not mad about AI as much as I would, I am frustrated for other people who are going to lose work over this. And that does suck. And I do want to say, like, I recognize how verticals have been giving everyone work, but I just think like put on your business hat, and it's hard to argue with why they're doing this,
Absolutely. I always say, because I'm a producing side and the crew side, I'm kind of the split. And I say, the first question any producer ever asks, and maybe the only question a producer ever asks is, but do we actually need it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can we get by without it?
Yeah.
It could be catering. No one do you actually need it.
Yeah. It could be the on-set medic or the safety officer, as we found out with some of these vertical shoots. Yeah, exactly.
Everything must be justified. I know, I'll take 1 minute of your time.
Sure.
For that person who is, whether it's in the film industry, a different part of their life, who is antsy and not quite sure if, when they should take a vertical leap in their own life. How would you quickly encourage them to dip their toe in the water, or just take a leap forward or leap upward? Like, what's that sort of like encouragement you'd give to that person who's hesitating to make a shift in their lives?
Look, I think hesitation is natural and responsible, right? Like there's this Chris Pratt quote, which pisses me off, which is, I intentionally made no plan B. And like I had a plan A, and like I was going to be a successful movie star, and I just threw myself at it. And, I had no plan. I forget his exact quote. And I'm like, yes, okay, great, dude. And for every one of you who's done that successfully, there's thousands who have failed and hate their life or, are doing one thing or the other. And it's like, I don't buy that. I think that you should have a plan B, and like it's totally fair to. And I used to teach kids like film school and actors and all the stuff of like a business of new media course and all this stuff. And I would talk about that. I would talk about part of where we're going is constant adaptation. Like, I don't know if everyone has noticed this or not, but the speed of these changes are just quickening. Like, it's going faster and faster. Like
Exponentially fast.
yeah, like I was at a dinner for an AI studio thing last night, and like we were just talking about that we have to relearn tools every week if we want to keep up with AI. Or like literally. And it's just going to keep going faster and faster. As people, we tend to like learn a set of tools and skills when we're young and then fetishize them. It's like give a man a hammer when he's 20 and then he doesn't understand why he needs to use an electric hammer when he's 40, right? Like so the problem is, yeah. So the problem is like, no, we're past that point now. And it's like, we all have to constantly be reinventing ourselves. Like, are there some careers where reinvention is not necessary? Probably. But like, one of my friends from high school is in the mortgage lending business, and he has to operate like a social media content stream to get business. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that he can beat out the other mortgage lenders in his little county, It's just a manner of thinking that you have to adapt, unless you've somehow like magically cornered some niche of some industry, which is never going to change and people always need, in which case call me up, let me know what that is, because maybe I want to get involved in that. But yeah, no, I would say like, if you've reached that point where you're like, okay, what I'm doing sucks. It's not, if it's not satisfying you like artistically, then that's okay. I think you can still do art as a hobby. And I think there's no shame in that. I did that for many years. I might do that again in the future. I don't know. But I think there's no shame, and there shouldn't be a shame. And nor should we be compelled to make all of our hobbies, to monetize all our hobbies and all our artistic pursuits. I'm against that. I have to do it sometimes, but I'm against it. So I wouldn't make the leap solely for that reason. The reason I would make the leap is like, if it's not satisfying you in a combination of like financially or giving you the stability that you need, if it is draining you spiritually every day, which was candidly my experience, right? Like, I don't want to sit in like 10 meetings a day, even with people I love. But if I'm working on something that I love, I will, right? But there are, people who are built for that and people who are not. If something is causing you more pain in your life than it is giving, it's a cost benefit thing. So I think if you're hesitant to make the leap, it really comes down to, why are you hesitant? What are you afraid of losing? And again, just kind of stoically stepping outside of that and being like, my fear is just my fear. What am I afraid of? Okay. I'm afraid of not having stability. Okay. For me, it was like, what happens if I do take a risk and I am not in a couple years able to make enough money doing this? Am I going to be homeless on the street? And I looked at like, probably not, right? Like, I have a little bit of money in my bank account. I have a father who still has a house. So, you know what I mean? Like, if you have family and friends and like a roof over your head, then you're better off than most people in the world, like in terms of like risks you could take, right? So there's not going to be a better time to take this risk. It's only going to be harder after this point. So it's either I do it now or I do it never. And thinking through that way is what moved me into that, but also just necessity. Like, I think I applied for like 1,000, corporate creative jobs in like the year after I got downsized, and got called back to a couple, got hired for none, So I'm just like, all right, that's a sign. I think that's a sign right there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Thom. This has been amazing, very insightful. And in the show notes, we're going to list all the different ways we can reach out and connect with you. And I just want to say to my audience, if you're building something new or becoming someone new, this is the Vertical Reach. And please just keep swiping up. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Vertical Reach podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If it sparked something for you, please share it with a fellow storyteller. Until next time, let's tell stories that can.